Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre. Hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes, even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
Hello.
Hello and happy Pride Month.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy Pride.
Happy, middle of it. Belated.
Yeah.
June.
Oh boy. Yeah, so exciting times over here at the old tandem desk.
Are they?
Yeah.
Well, tell me.
I mean, we're recording an episode.
Oh, well, that is exciting.
I don't need to tell you you're here
I
doing
mean,
it.
what's better than hanging out with my bestest friend in the whole world and beloved co-host?
Well, I'm your wife.
Yeah, and lover, ex-girlfriend.
Ew. What?
Well, we broke up and got married.
No, we did not break up.
That happens when you get married, is you break up and
It's
then
a
you
continuation
get married.
of...
No, there's a formal separation.
This
Don't
is
you remember?
off the rails.
We were standing in a circle and had to cut ourselves, and it was a bonfire. And
That must have been another ex-girlfriend.
guy in a goat mask.
Oh, you wish. You
So-
really, really wish.
What are we doing today?
Well, we're recording our pod.
I think because it's Pride Month, we should.
Again, with the eyes. Did I not correct you enough the last time that you kept saying I instead of we?
We think over here at the Tandem Hive Mind,
We've decided to do a special episode for Pride Month on queer horror.
absolutely, yes, and just celebrate all the things that we love.
Yeah, queer voices and queer representation in our favorite genre. And
Surprise,
arguably
surprise.
the LGBTQ plus community really loves horror.
Oh, it should be a surprise to nobody that queer folks have been loving and making horror movies since they existed.
Yes.
So if you have a problem with one, I don't think it's possible to enjoy the other.
Since horror films existed.
Exactly.
The horror genre existed.
Yeah, since horror films existed. Yeah. I'm sorry if I wasn't specific in my wording. But, as we're going to talk about, there have been not only, gay creators, but gay creators creating content during a time when it was literally against the law to do so, which is something that from my comfortable, luxury properties atop my gilded hilltops, I can't even fathom. I mean, imagine doing a thing that you don't have to do could potentially ruin your career and your life, and doing it because it's important that people see it, that it get done, that the message be sent. That's next level bravery. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
And we're not claiming to be experts at all in the queer experience or representation of the queer community, but we are arguably somewhat experts in the horror genre, so we're going to do our best.
Absolutely.
And we wanted to this was a really important episode for us to make.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the incredible things that you will find when you are watching queer horror is the universality of its thematic elements. The fact that as a straight person, as a cisgendered person, as any kind of person, let me just ask you, have you ever felt lonely? Like an imposter? Have you ever felt like you didn't meet the expectations of people or society or loved ones?
Or that you couldn't be yourself?
That you couldn't express yourself?
You felt uncomfortable in your own skin? What other people were telling you you should be and act like?
Congratulations. You have now identified with a portion of the LGBT plus experience. So it's a human experience is the point.
And with people of color, mixed race.
Exactly.
I mean, this is a very...
Once again, horror
continuation
remains
of that thread.
Such an incredibly fertile ground to tell not only socially relevant stories, but also kick-ass fucking scary movies.
And shows and books.
Yes!
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, the Hays Code.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how can you not? It's the horrible, horrible elephant in the room.
So for those of you that don't know what the Hays Code is, the Hays Code was a self-imposed industry standard for motion pictures that was established between 1934 and 1968. And it prohibited profanity, suggestive nudity, graphic or realistic violence, sexual persuasions. So that's that.
Yeah. That's the whole Ozzie and Harriet
identifying.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was obviously you couldn't show any homosexual or same-sex themes or depictions on screen, especially overtly, but you really could barely show any sexuality at all.
Yes.
It was an extremely puritanical
no
time in
rape either.
filmmaking.
That was the last bit of the Hays Code.
No what?
Rape.
Which, okay.
Should always be, in my opinion.
So the Hays Code was established by the Catholic Commission. It was puritanical in nature by design because it was created by religious people who just really, really love that First Amendment, I guess.
Well, from 1934 to 1954, it was closely identified with Joseph Breen, who was the administrator appointed by Hays to enforce this code in Hollywood. And it began to weaken as more people started to embrace their individualism.
A lot of horror stalwarts like Herschel Gordon Lewis and George Romero had a lot to do with that. That was around the time they were producing their early movies.
And then in 1968, after several years of minimal enforcement, the production code, the Hays Code, was replaced by the MPAA film rating system.
Which is largely what we have today. I mean, it's a lot more granular now. There are more ratings than there used to be, which is good. There are nuances in the ratings. I remember, especially growing up in the 80s, there was a period of time before PG-13 was established where there was a series of PG-rated movies that were like,
yeah,
I don't know. I think it was specifically Red Dawn that created that rating.
Yeah. It's like
or
you can
Poltergeist.
say this many swear words, but not this many. Or
No,
you can say
there's literally,
I know.
Yeah, like you can have this much titty in one movie, but you can't have too much titty. There's, I'm not kidding, an actual percentage of breast exposure allowed that skirts a
I
rating.
feel like that's a lot of actors and actresses have that in their writer
But
too,
just imagine,
which is like, we'll show side boob but will not show areola.
That being your job is like, okay, come up with the percentage of nude body that is acceptable in this kind of movie and which is acceptable in that. I feel like I'm describing the life of every monk ever. Is just sit around and think about sex way more than normal people do.
Well, the
and then
genre,
make rules about it.
The genre of horror is really about knowing you shouldn't look at something, but
Yes.
still wanting to.
It's that mischievous subversion. Good trouble.
And so the LGBTQ plus community can relate because, through their repression, and despite Hays Code censorship of queer representation, as this was lifted in the late 60s, queer representation is often hidden from mainstream film and TV. But as horror has evolved, we see more and more queer representation in this genre, which is exciting.
It's especially important to set the scene in the way that you just did when you think about early pioneers, just how bold it was. I want to talk for a second about the great James Whale, creator of some of the greatest horror movies of all time, The Old Dark House, obviously Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein.
And he was gay himself, correct?
An openly gay man who suffered horribly for it, professionally, in his personal life. But that did not stop this absolute genius filmmaker and very complicated man. But he made one of the most overtly gay movies and characters in The Bride of Frankenstein. And of course, I am talking of Ernest Thesiger's performance as Dr. Septimus Pretorius, with the coolest name ever. So Dr. Septimus Pretorius is the doctor that lures Victor Frankenstein back into his science and reunites him with the monster, and then, gets him to create the bride, who is just going to be the wife of the monster, make a female monster for the male monster. And of course, the female monster's first act is one of defiance. Now, like the monster was defied by his creator, she defies her creator. Says, I know you made me just to be a sex slave to this other thing, but no. And the monster ends up becoming sort of the anti-hero at the end by basically killing himself and burning it all down. But now Dr. Septimus Pretorius is played so obviously as a gay man in this movie. I mean, his affectations, everything about it. And James Whale was quite open about the fact that he was intentional in this. And just the idea that this movie came out, I think, in 1935, which is, right at the advent of this horribly restrictive code that kept actors in the closet, that, really scared people and ruined careers, that James Whale just gave a huge middle finger to the whole system and said, fuck you. And the movie was a smash hit, a huge sensation, and everyone loved it, which I imagine must be an extremely complicated and hurtful feeling to be someone who creates something the public loves, but you yourself are something the public does not love.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that tortured Mr. Whale in his life.
I want to talk about my first memory experience of seeing queerness on film.
Oh, cool.
Which is Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh, yeah. That is definitely an introduction.
So it's a 1975 musical horror, for those of you who don't know.
For the one unlucky person that has never heard of it.
Starring Tim Curry, Susan Sarandon, Meat Loaf, and Barry Bostwick.
Oh, R.I.P., Mr. Loaf.
And it's really a campy, culty film.
It might be the campy, culty film.
Right. But it liberated queerness as dominant in the film and introduced Frankenfurter as a queer mad scientist, fitting in that mad scientist trope that you talked about with Frankenstein. And he reconstructs the male body.
Tim Curry is
amazing in it.
I mean, he's awesome in everything, but it's important to never forget that he was in this movie. You know, like,
it's a gay character.
It is a transcendent,
charismatic. He's sexually adventurous. He's openly communicative about, what excites him.
He's super, and in the best drag and camp traditions, everything is an innuendo and a double entendre. It's like everything he says is dirty,
Yeah, and he challenges those gender norms.
It's
and
wonderful.
Sexual norms, and he also, there's also other LGBTQ plus characters in the film. Columbia, that groupie of Frankfurters. And even though it's a funny film, it's still considered scary because it touches on power, taboo, and then, the horror elements of the plot of, these people coming into this whole new world.
Oh yeah, the all the tropes are there, but what I mean,
and audiences love this film. This is something that is, I would say, not everybody loves this film, but it's universally adored.
It's an interesting movie to talk about because it arguably has been surpassed by its own legacy.
Yeah,
by this point.
Absolutely.
I would argue that many, many more people are aware of Rocky Horror Picture Show. Even just the iconic image of the red lipstick biting lip.
Yeah.
From the poster, than have seen it. Actually, it's firmly ingrained in the public consciousness, and it is. I would think for people who have maybe just heard of it and not seen it, would be shocking to them that it is a unapologetically queer movie.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
it is right out there, but its legacy has been one of people over the years, and this is, decades before streaming was ever thought of, playing this movie over and over again in theaters, gathering together, dressing up, having parties.
Yeah, it's a celebration of otherness.
Every city you went to, there was a theater
Yes.
playing this movie.
Mm-hmm. And it's always like a Halloween tradition.
And it still goes on.
Theaters.
It still goes
Absolutely.
on. They have sing-alongs.
Yep.
I mean, just the joy and celebration, and also the brazenness and the audacity to stand in front of a hostile world in makeup and costume and just celebrating with such unrestrained joy. I mean, it's everything that we love at Terror in Tandem. And I will admit, took me a while to figure this movie out, because for the longest time I kept approaching it from strictly a horror point of view. And I'm like, well, it's just campy. It wasn't until I was a little bit older that I really, really understood just the magnificence. I watched it through a lens that wasn't my own. I saw it through another lens. I watched it differently.
To me, it felt like, and this wasn't until many years later after I saw this film, what it was like to walk into my first gay nightclub.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what happens.
I know what you mean.
These characters come in to this, experience where everybody is 100% authentically themselves.
Very much. And the characters
for the two,
are
like straight characters.
Exactly. They're very like corn-fed
But they
American. That's like kind of the whole vibe of the movie, is their liberation.
Yes.
And I mean, shout out to a red hot Susan Sarandon. I mean, my goodness.
It's the liberation of
these
authenticity.
Of these two heteronormative people who have been sort of shoehorned into their Barbie and Ken doll roles.
Yep.
And they are, I guess, in Alex Jones's worst nightmare, liberated.
Yeah.
They don't turn gay in the movie. They just
embrace
lighten up
their sexuality, actually.
And by the end, they are much, much happier. And it's just it's a fucking blast. If you can view it through the lens of celebration, there's nothing like it.
And
I mean, there's a
inclusion.
reason, and inclusion. And there's a reason that this movie has millions of followers 40 years later, still flocking to theaters in costume, in drag.
Absolutely.
To watch this, to sing along, to be with each other. It is just so, so good. And Tim Curry, that poor man has been through quite a lot lately, health-wise, and we wish him all the best, but what a fucking legend.
Big-time listener.
Also, he was in Legend. Yeah, I know. We know you're listening, Mr. Curry, and best wishes as always. We all float down here. Well, while we're given some background and shout-outs and whatnot, I would be remiss and probably punished in horrible ways if I didn't give a special shout-out to the absolute kings and queens and otherwise of queer representation in horror, the Cenobites.
Yeah,
yes,
of
the
course.
Hell Priests themselves, the androgynous BDSM angels of suffering, queer rock stars. They don't give a fuck about your questions. They don't care what you think of them. They don't care if you want to know how they identify. They're just going to roll up in their full leather body gloves with all sorts of piercings and weird things hanging off of them and shoot chains at you. That is it.
Self-expression.
Absolutely.
To the nines.
Yes. Now, the original Hellraiser came out in 1987. It was written and directed by Clive Barker, who wrote The Hellbound Heart, the novella on which it was based. And Clive Barker is and has been for many decades an openly gay man. So there is a androgynous sensuality in the way the lines are delivered. There's a languid delivery that Doug Bradley gives. He has also this deep sonorous voice, but their movements are so lithe and graceful. There's a sensuality to them. They talk always about sensation and pleasure and flesh and oh my God. But as there are
the sexual fluidity.
Yes, there are hell priests that are female forward. There are hell priests that are male facing. There are hell priests that are God knows what. Jesus. I mean, they're just literal mashups of flesh. Then there's the reboot of Hellraiser, which gender swapped Pinhead. But can you gender swap a demon? The point is, the Cenobites to me represent the ridiculousness of the conversation itself. Because why would you ascribe human sexuality to a demon, to a supernatural creature? These aren't people. They don't fall into the same categories as we do, but we're always trying to plug them into it. There's always a contingent that is mad about the gender of a character. And I'm like, well they come from hell.
The Cenobites and Hellraiser really does represent the fluidity of gender and of sexuality.
Yes, exactly.
In a way that can't really be pinned down.
Nice.
No pun
but also,
you know what I mean, though?
It's paired with the fear that instills in a lot of people, I think. You know, when you talk about sexual freedom and whatnot, someone may hear that and think, okay, I am free to choose and make my own decisions, which is the way I hear it. Someone else hearing sexual freedom automatically thinks promiscuity or irresponsibility, which is not what that means.
Well, yeah, because sexual freedom means also the freedom to not have sex.
It means it means what it means. It's freedom to have sex, to not have sex. But it's the freedom part, I think, paired with the sexuality that frightens some people. And the Cenobites are such a perfect representation, being both androgynous in their gender and sexuality. However, they're also deeply sensual and physical, and also a representation of suffering, you know, of pain, which is often associated with coming to terms with one's own gender identity or sexual identity, and the fear that instills in others. Anyway, shout out to the Cenobites. They are the kings, queens, and otherwise of queer representation. Honestly, it does not get scarier than a Cenobite, in my opinion. You walk into a room and there are a bunch of Cenobites there holding that box. Man, you know what's up.
I think it's time for a break. That's what's up.
I agree. Oh, we're so back.
So I wanted to talk about my next experience with queer horror, and I would say that it's more of a implied queer horror. I think that the LGBTQ plus community has embraced this as a, favorite movie, which is The Craft from 1996.
Fuck yeah, absolutely.
Starring Fairuza Balk, Nev Campbell, Robin Tunney, and Rachel True.
Quick shout out to Fairuza Balk. Where
Wow.
has she been lately? I love Fairuza Balk. Return to Oz is legit scary.
Yeah, she's scary just by herself.
I love her. She is like super intense and gothy.
Yeah.
And what is she? Has she been in anything lately? Like,
I don't know.
I miss Fairuza Balk.
Well, Hollywood has always portrayed, this dangerous femme fatale trope, and women who showed, embracing their own power and their own sexuality were often the first ones that were like burned at the witch trials or drowned in a river. So I think that the connections in The Craft, it analyzes a lot of the gay experience.
Absolutely.
The othering, the alienation.
Well, anytime you have, a group of girls hanging out together, there's always that implication. And they all go to like a private school. So they're
Catholic school.
Yeah, they're all dressed in that sort of like drab gray uniform.
Yeah.
That, it's a skirt, but it's like
It's the plaid skirt.
it drowns out like any sort of like sexuality, really.
Or like being themselves, showing who they really are.
It's
personality.
There's literally zero color in it. Yeah.
And so, this film, it explores that alienation against the occult. And we find the girls longing for each other, longing for relationships with each other,
feeling
realizing
spurned
that they're
by each other.
each other and different from everywhere else. They actively create their own community outside of the norm, and they're able to be themselves. They're fully embrace these powers that they're able to capture and conjure. And I think that the most powerful part, and why I really wanted to talk about this, is the revenge plot of the film. Because I think when people are alienated, it's a powerful narrative for the queer community.
Yeah, there's
to feel
and there is
control
always
over the revenge.
There is a moment in the movie where you're like, oh, if you just acted a little differently there, I feel like this all could have gone a lot better.
Are you talking about the girl's hair?
Yeah, I mean, and they're just
She was so
Fairuza Balk
mean.
gets driven over the edge.
Oh yeah, she does, by everyone in her life.
Yeah.
So,
but I love me a movie about people being afraid of teenage girls. Like,
yeah.
And
I would argue that the film's revenge, elements is really about trying to gain more acceptance, because they want to get love. They want to get healed.
They want all the things that everyone wants.
Happy and safe.
Yeah.
They want to be successful. So that, except for Fairuza Balk,
Well,
she wants all the power.
They want those things on their terms, not on someone else's terms, which is normal. I love that you brought this up, because The Craft is an important movie for me. I grew up in the 90s, and it starred everyone I ever had a crush on at the time. And like, just the outward representation of female empowerment as literal magic power. Like, there's the scene where, the weather's affected by their moods.
Yep.
And the fear that instills. It's such a perfect allegory for feminine rage and for puberty, for the fear that brings in adults of like, well, what if they grow up to be a way that I don't like or don't approve of?
It's that alienation of the other without anyone interested in understanding.
Yeah.
That really is the connectiveness to the queer experience.
Yeah. It's a movie that'll leave you feeling light as a feather, but stiff as a board.
Ew.
They say that a bunch of times.
I know, but in that context, it just feels like a hard on.
Because you go there. I was thinking dead body. Which isn't better, I realize.
What's got you thinking?
I want to talk about a movie that, like a few movies that we have mentioned and will be mentioning today, was dismissed or panned on release and then got a well-deserved reviewing and reevaluation. And that is sorry. My gosh, that is A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing about this movie. I don't know how anyone expected that this movie was going to succeed. You have the first movie, which is wildly successful, establishes the genre, the lore, all the characters. And then it ends on this really weird twist. And then in the second movie, none of that gets followed up on. None of it. None of the questions are answered. The twist ending, it's like it never happened. There's a new character, Mark Patton's Jesse. The only real connection is Jesse's family. He's a young teenager. Their family moves into the Thompson house. Mm-hmm. So the Thompsons have moved out.
Nancy Thompson, everyone.
Yeah. Jesse moves in. He finds Nancy's diary. He reads it, and he starts having dreams about Freddy. Now, that's one thing. You might realize from certain online discourse that fans get attached to things, and when you set their expectations and then subvert them, they go all sorts of Last Jedi, Star Wars nerd on you, which happens to be the only sequel I thought was any good. So, on top of all of that, this is an undeniably overtly gay film. It is all over this movie. Now, it was a bit controversial because Mark Patton at the time was a young aspiring actor who was in the closet and began to become very, very nervous about some of the inclusion of these gay themes. Now, there's a scene where he runs into his coach at a gay bar. His coach is then later killed by gym towels, naked in a shower. There's that scene with his friend in the bedroom where they kind of have that sort of moment. And then there's that scene where he's about to fuck his girlfriend and he literally runs away screaming. The plot is...
Was the actor worried that he would be typecast or be outed?
Both. Now, Mark Patton at the time signed onto this movie because Nightmare on Elm Street was quite famously Johnny Depp's first movie, and it did pretty well for Mr. Depp. I think he was hoping for something similar, and he was really, really worried he was going to be outed and he was going to be typecast. Now, at the time, this was 1985. We're talking height of the Reagan years, height of the AIDS crisis, and a time of very unfortunate homophobia in this country. Sound familiar? So, unfortunately...
Which, I have to say, not just... This homophobia exists extremely prevalently in many other countries to the point of
absolutely
same-sex couples are
absolutely
not able to even
I'm just
visit.
saying I've always been told that this was the greatest country on earth, and I don't think homophobia exists in the greatest place on earth, but it does. So, now, unfortunately, at the time, director Jack Shoulder and writer David Chaskin, they fielded a lot of questions about how obviously gay this movie was. A lot of the themes in this movie surrounded Jesse essentially being possessed by Freddy and becoming a corporeal Freddy. So Freddy visits him in his dreams and starts influencing him and turning into him. He bursts out of his chest in one scene like Alien, and he gets him to, trying to get him to kill and change his personality.
So was that the spin that they said that Freddy was making him do these things? Like devil made me do it.
The theme was obviously someone wrestling with their sexuality. He's on a, he's surrounded by muscly dudes on playing sports. He's not really able to connect with his girlfriend. There are all these expectations placed on him. There's that famous pool party scene that's actually pretty rad. And in his dreams, Freddy is preying upon his indecisiveness and his emotional vulnerability. And it's very much mimicking the experience of somebody struggling with their sexuality. The more they deny themselves, the stronger the demon becomes, the stronger the voice becomes, the angrier they get, the more bitter they become. This is not something that you can deny forever, and Freddy is not someone you can deny forever. Now, when I say unfortunately about the director and the writer, when they were asked about this, they placed all of it on Mark Patton's performance. They said, we had no intention of this being gay at all. It must have been the actor. He's super gay. And
they outed him.
Yes, and this caused a rift between them, obviously, and great emotional harm to Mark Patton, who took a long hiatus from acting and has since returned in recent years. But if you want to know more about that, I obviously recommend there's a really, really good documentary. It's called Scream Queen. Like Scream, Queen.
Yeah, it's on Shudder.
Yes, and Mark. It's all about Mark Patton's experience. It's very, very. It's heartbreaking shit. But now that I've bummed you out, let me bring you back up with rock star, actor, gentleman, raconteur, and ally Robert Englund, who from the very, very start in the 80s said, "Oh, this is obviously a gay movie. I intentionally did that." There was a scene in the movie where he's getting Jesse to like suck on one of his claw fingers, and he talks about this in an interview where he's like, "Oh, I did that on purpose."
Blade fingers?
Yeah, where he's like putting it in his mouth a little bit. Yes, I mean he's
not the act of the.
Oh yeah, you don't want to.
I'm talking about that rusty blade.
Yeah, a dirty, nasty blade finger that's like cut through a bunch of people. I don't want that in my mouth. But Englund calls it a bisexual film. And from the very beginning, he has always said, without hesitation, oh yeah, Freddy's a queer icon. Absolutely. He says he came to this realization in 1985 when he went to a Halloween party and he saw several drag queens dressed as Nancy Thompson, various versions of Nancy from the movie. And he realized, oh my God, this is something.
Yeah.
And go back and watch the Freddy movies and tell me Freddy Krueger isn't a campy queen. My goodness. He hams it up throughout the whole thing. Now, the second movie is the most overtly gay, and in more recent years, the writer and director have since recanted their earlier statements. I guess now, since it's not the 80s anymore, there's some distance. They've been like, oh yeah, that was intentional, sure. But fuck those guys. I'm glad Mark Patton has come back to acting. I wish him all the best and all the luck. Sorry this was such a terrible experience for him, but I really urge everyone, watch this movie, because take out the expectation that it is a direct sequel to the first movie, because it isn't. It's more like this strange Elseworlds tale that kind of exists on its own, starring Freddy Krueger, but when you watch it through the lens of an in-the-closet gay man wrestling with his identity, it is a fascinating movie. It's also gory as fuck. So like, I don't know what you're bitching about. It's a really, really good entry.
What
and then by the third, just I mean, come on. The initial reception to the movie was quite harsh because of these themes.
Okay.
I'm yelling at critics from 40 years ago.
Yeah,
so you bunch of jerks. But definitely give it a watch through that lens, because I'm not saying everything works in this movie, and it is definitely a strange bird of a film. It's a weird one. But when you reevaluate it through an LGBT lens, it has much more to say than if you're just watching it like it's a straight up Freddy movie. Because through that lens, it's like, well, what's going on? Who is this guy? Why is everybody different? But as its own thing, I'm glad it's gotten a reevaluation, because it does deserve it. Freddy 2, Freddy's Revenge.
I want to talk just briefly about a film called Rift.
Ooh, I haven't seen that one.
From 2007. It's on Hulu. It's a psychological thriller directed by an Icelandic filmmaker. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name.
No, those are... apologies to our many Icelandic listeners. Your names have many consonants in them.
But the film itself revolves around a man named Gunnar, and he gets a call from his estranged lover.
It's an extremely
Einar.
Icelandic name.
Yeah.
Oh God, Gunnar and Einar.
Yeah.
I have to see this movie just based on that.
And Einar had disappeared a year earlier, and Gunnar hadn't heard from him. So he goes to the cabin where he was last seen, and it basically strange and terrifying things start to happen at this cabin. Why this is, I'm definitely want to bring this up because it features a gay relationship between the two main characters, and it delves into grief and loss in a way that I have come to really enjoy in horror. I think it adds like a depth and multiple layers to the film.
I agree. Yeah.
It's one of those slow burning atmospheric films. And
you also don't see a lot of output from Iceland. You know,
Right.
it's a small country with a small film industry.
but they're very open.
Yes. And it is a country that is historically pretty friendly to
Yes.
the community.
That's what I meant by open.
Yeah. Good for you, Iceland.
So it's definitely like suspenseful and really engaging. But the sameness of that same-sex relationship between the two men and the things that they deal with, just like everyone deals with, which is, that loss and grief and depression
universal themes,
and sadness and anger, and all of those things are really prevalent. It's not about the fact they're gay.
No.
It's about their connection and their loss and these strange things that sort of pull them back together. That is really important in this horror film. And that's one of the other pieces I wanted to mention, which I should have mentioned earlier, that queer horror doesn't need to just be because there are queer characters.
No, sometimes it's thematically, especially films made during the Hays Code, you have subtext and themes starring quote-unquote straight characters.
So you should check that out because it's definitely up your alley.
Well, sticking in Scandinavia, I want to give a quick mention to Let the Right One In.
Oh, right.
Now, obviously, we've talked about this because we did a now classic episode enshrined in the Library of Congress, a remake of Let the Right One In and Let Me In. And now, this is one of the chief reasons why Let Me In, although it's a well-shot, well-acted, competent film, why it just does not do it for me the way that Let the Right One In does. Now, in Let the Right One In, the Swedish original, Ellie is literally, I'm sorry to spoiler alert, a movie that's like 15 years old and a book that's even older, but Ellie is literally living as a trans female vampire. Began life as a boy who was either mutilated or mutilated themselves, and now lives as a semi-androgynous but female-presenting vampire / human. I mean, they pretend to be a human. So the thing about Ellie, in the original, there's a very graphic, short scene where they actually show this, and you don't learn everything about Ellie's history, but you are shown that they were castrated at a certain point, and you learn the truth about their sexuality. And Lina Leandersson plays Ellie with an androgyny.
Yes.
And there's really, in her friendship with Oscar, it's much less of a love story than they make it up in the American version.
Yeah, it's more of a changing of the guards, which we had talked about
Yes.
in our remake, which is I need a protector and a soldier for my life, and this is how I'm grooming you.
And they
essentially.
did do that in the remake, but the thing about the remake is that obviously that scene and any mentions of Ellie's transgenderism is completely eliminated. And Chloe Grace Moritz is a very obviously female presenting girl in this movie, or vampire. I mean, she's like centuries old, so kind of weird calling her a girl, but I gotta call out the original. Ellie is I mean, literally a trans vampire antihero in this movie. She's a monster who also saves Oscar's life, and there's a beautiful, touching friendship. It's a complicated movie. I love this movie. Side note, Thomas Alfredson, please come back. You made two of my favorite movies with Let the Right One In and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and just because you made one crummy movie, that doesn't mean you have to stop making movies. It's been enough time since The Snowman. Michael Fassbender's doing fine. No one blames you. Please come back and make another movie. You're so good at it. Anyway, I know Mr. Alfredson listens. He's a big listener. I just wanted to say that. I'll say it in Swedish in the bonus episode.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a good one for sure. Well, my most recent foray is through a TV series that is from 2020. I don't see any rumblings of another season, unfortunately.
You know, that sucks.
But it's Curon.
Oh, is it Italian?
Yes.
Yeah.
So before I tell you about that, I want to tell you that there is actually a village in northern Italy, on the border of Austria and Switzerland, called Curon.
Okay.
It's got a longer name. It's like Curon Vestona.
That's not far from the region where my family's originally from.
Awesome.
Like a long, long time ago. But that's why a bunch of... So my just a listener, my family, the Italian side, part of them come from the north, part of them come from the south. There's a big difference. The northerners, they have blonde hair, green eyes. They look Swiss. And the southerners are much more stereotypically what you would think of as Italian. Dark,
yes.
Swarthy.
Well, back to Curon.
No, this isn't Richard's history show?
No, but what happened is there were protests from the village inhabitants, and the town was swallowed by a flood, except for the bell tower, which dates back to 1357.
What were they protesting?
So there was a water reservoir created in... part of the town didn't want it and part did. And,
reservoir protests are the worst.
It was basically like right after World War II, a few years after World War II, and it originally belonged to Austria, this land.
Yeah.
But basically they created an Italian community there, the survivors, people who stayed behind.
Yeah.
And there's said to be actually like a village under this lake.
Whoa.
And the only thing that you can see is the top of this clock tower.
Okay.
So this is where the basis for this TV show, the TV series, supernatural horror TV series, Curon, it takes place in the town, and it centers around a mother who goes back to her childhood home, which is an inn. It's an abandoned hotel where her father still lives and had cast her out decades earlier. She goes back with her twin children, and they start to uncover dark information about their own family legacy.
Did they take a 23andMe?
No.
Just buyer beware.
According to locals now, even at Curon, and also on the show, the bell tower, the bells were removed in the 50s. Legend has it that the ringing can still be heard on long, dark, cold, wintry nights.
Yeah, that's just tinnitus.
In the TV show, if you hear the bells ring, your twin other will come out of the water and kill you.
Oh, that's fucked up.
At least
your doppelganger?
That's what it appears to be.
Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a now.
Again, this is only one
heaven,
season. So this town is cursed, the tower is cursed, and this family is cursed. And people have referred to this as Lovecraftian. People love to do that. And
let's get a second season, y'all.
There is a not only is there like a twin part of you, but sometimes one of the family members takes the form of a wolf.
Okay.
It's pretty chaotic.
So, I mean,
It's pretty amazing. It's scary and it's very mysterious. But again, this is only one season. So not all these questions have been answered.
well, what makes this queer horror in your opinion?
I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that at the top. The siblings, the twins, one is deaf and the other, Daria, she is a lesbian. And as their family starts to, get integrated into this town, she's outed
Oh.
by her brother, by other, not in a cruel way, but
No, but that can be when, it could be very traumatizing if
she
you're
ends
not
up having
ready
a
for it.
relationship with another girl in the town, and that becomes, this rumor, and people start to talk about it, and then her brother finds out and talks about it openly in front of her family, and so essentially outs her. It's not a devastating
Yeah.
part of the series itself, but it does also have an interesting play on the doppelganger part of the show. That other self.
Yeah, like us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that other self can experience a little bit more fluidity than their grounded self.
Interesting.
So
Because they're not human. They're,
correct.
Yeah.
Or are they? Or are none of them human? I mean,
I'm just saying
that's the thing.
There's this weird, you see this sometimes in unfortunate circles of certain science fiction fandoms where they're really concerned about the gender of like an alien character, and you're like, why? That's not human. That this creature is a plant. Why are you trying to make it male or female? It could not even be a binary reproductive system. Who knows? Why is that important? There was a storyline recently in Guardians of the Galaxy, the comic, where it came out the Star-Lord was pansexual, and I remember reading it and being like, well, obviously he is. He fucking lives in space. Right. So was Captain Kirk. Guess what? Those green aliens may have looked like ladies, but they were not. They were aliens.
Well, this show, the main characters are twins, but it also explores the duality of these doppelgangers.
That's
the
fascinating.
Duality of people that you are your social facing self and your, recluse self. And
listen, as
repression, the repression of the inner self being hidden and sometimes known as like the evil twin.
As an Italian American whose family has been here for over 100 years, has never been to the country, and doesn't speak the language, I demand a second season of this.
Yeah. Do you, it ended on a cliffhanger, so I don't know.
No.
I know. I don't know what's happening.
Maybe
with
they're
this
just
show.
Taking their time.
And I don't know if I mentioned that it is Italian language too.
Ah.
I know it's Italian.
Molto bene.
Yeah. So I would check it out. It's on Netflix right now. It's strange and terrific. Very well acted.
Netflix is weird with its renewals. You never know. I have one last movie that I'm going to recommend, and this is a good one, y'all. It is Spiral from 2019. Not to be confused with the sort of Saw movie starring Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson. No, this is a small indie film from Canada, directed by Curtis David Harder from 2019. It's on Shudder. It is fantastic. I really, really recommend this one. So it stars. It's about it takes place in the 90s, and it's about a gay interracial male couple with their daughter. They move into a nice little house in a nice little neighborhood in Canada. This is a Canadian film. And their neighbors are so friendly, maybe a little too friendly. So it's a real slow burn of a movie. Now, one of the main characters, Malik, is he's not only a gay man, he's a black gay man. So he's also the like so many men in that position, he has been witness to some horrible things in his life, and that's left him with some trauma and some PTSD, and also some very understandable paranoia and trust issues. So he is immediately suspicious of these weird white neighbors who are like super duper friendly and accommodating. He starts looking into the history of the house. His husband is white and views things through the lens of a gay man, but through the lens of a white gay man, which is not quite the same perspective. And that's an interesting thing about this movie, is that these two men experience life through a similar lens, but also through their own backgrounds. You know, one of them has dealt with being of mixed race and the other has not in a white dominant society. So, anyway, that comes to, some tension where the white husband is saying, why don't you trust the neighbors? You're always so suspicious. It's not always about your race. It's not always about you being gay. It's not always about that one thing you saw in the past. And Malik is, a little bit more cautious. Now he starts to uncover some shit. I really don't want to give anything away because it's one of those slow burns with a great payoff. But yeah, I mean, the neighbors are weird and there's a reason for that. And the house, turns out, has a history of a very particular type of occupant. And it turns out there's a reason everyone is so happy that a gay couple moved in. So it really, really deals with that insidious prejudice of someone smiling to your face and wishing you harm. The polite eugenicist, the person who will, shake your hand and say, God bless you, but absolutely votes for everyone who wants to end your existence as a person and donates to causes against you. That kind of horrible feeling of betrayal, of you've been invited into someone's home and fed and they break their hospitality and trust. So it's not a feel-good movie. I mean,
it doesn't feel good listening
to
it.
it's a bit bleak. I really enjoyed this one because I love me a good slow burn with a downer ending, and this has all the goods. There's a line from it where Malik says, people don't change, they just get better at hiding how they feel. Shit, Malik, I hear ya. That is spot fucking on sometimes. And it is it's really worth a watch. It rewards the patient viewer. But for anybody like me who has a weird fantasy of like moving into a house with a weird history that you slowly uncover by finding, diagrams or diaries or weird books, like I want that to happen to me.
Yeah.
I go into creepy basements all the time and all I ever find are spiders.
Well, that's excellent. And I will not be watching that.
I have been asked to stop going into people's basements.
I just wanted to mention a couple queer horror books.
I'd love it.
The first one is by Helen Oyemi. White is for Witching, it's called. And it takes place in a family-run bed and breakfast in Dover. And again, twins, Miranda and Elliot, lose their mother, Lily, when they're 16.
I believe we've discussed this before, that
one twin is good
and one is evil. Yes.
Yeah.
Always. Always.
And so their mother dies on assignment in Haiti. She's a photojournalist. And Miranda ends up becoming extremely depressed and becomes a Wiccan. And the Yoruba housekeeper comes into the picture.
Interesting.
And then strange things start to happen. And the house is filled with queer women that haunt the walls.
Do you want to explain real quick what a Yoruba is?
It's like a...
it's a West African culture.
Yeah.
Yoruba is a West African
like
culture. And the religion of which was animistic and tribal in nature, and during the slave trade mixed with Catholicism became known as Vodun or voodoo.
Yeah.
So Yorubic traditions very heavily steeped in spirits and possession and the idea of riding the body, of souls riding the body. That's really cool.
Yeah. So that is White is for Witching.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
The other one is Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin.
It's Rain and
And it's a
Manhunt.
trans story.
Oh.
And, you know, it's a trans horror story. And the protagonists, Beth and Fran, make their way across like the destruction of the New England coast, hunting for trans people to help protect them and give them a sense of community. They hunt feral men and harvest their organs so that they can stay safe, like carrying their, you know,
As you
balls
do.
and as like protective necklaces and things like that.
I mean, I've got several
testicles.
I take just to the grocery store.
And then a really terrible accident happens.
Aside from the ball cutting?
Well, that's intentional.
Oh, that's not
a terrible
that's not
accident
accidental.
happens, and they meet Robbie, and the three of them basically become a group to destroy anyone.
Now, I feel like I'm obsessing a bit here, but do they do anything to this man's balls?
To Robbie's?
Yes.
No, they work with Robbie.
That's good. That's good. I'm just glad someone's balls are safe.
But it's a really like dark, interesting horror story.
It sounds like it.
But it also talks about gender binaries and the world, you know, against the trans acceptance. You should look at the cover of the book. You'll get a sense of what I was talking about. But yeah, I wanted to just share those two queer novels in case you're interested in reading instead of watching.
Now, I've got a little bit of good news for horror hounds out there. Anybody who is a fan, like me, of 2004's Seed of Chucky will, of course, remember Glenn, or Glenda, this child of Chucky and Tiffany, who very famously throughout the movie spent most of the movie wondering what they were. Literally asking the question, what am I? And by the end of the movie, decided that they wanted to be known not as Glenn, but as Glenda. Mm-hmm. And I believe now as Gigi. So it's an interesting movie because it's a comedy. It's a horror comedy. It doesn't always land, but the comedy's never at the expense of Billy Boyd's Glenda. It's not a transphobic movie at all. It's actually a movie featuring a prominent trans character, and one of the most affecting moments of the movie is Chucky immediately accepts Glenda and uses feminine pronouns, like right away. It's actually Tiffany who's really shitty about it, in kind of a reversal. But it also has John Waters as like a real sleazy paparazzo in it, which is really fun. It's an, you know, from 2004, so it's not yesterday, but it's not exactly forever ago, but it is kind of an early representation of a trans character in a horror movie, not just being a straight villain, actually having a whole arc, an identity issue. The movie really revolves around it. And it's also got a whole meta element. Jennifer Tilly plays Tiffany and Jennifer Tilly in the movie. And she herself is a gay icon for, you know, obvious reasons. It's a lot of fun, and fans of Glenn and Glenda will be happy to know that Billy Boyd and the character are returning for season 3 of the surprisingly awesome sci-fi series Chucky.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So that's something to look forward to. I'm actually really happy about that. I always love it when a Hobbit pops up in something cool. Now, you may have noticed that in this episode we focused primarily on if not positive representations, then authentic representations. What we stayed away from was the trope of using cross-dressing or transgenderism as the identifier of a villain. So a movie where the evil person is bad because they wear women's clothing or because they are gay. There are a lot of examples of that out there, and I'm not going to give them any air.
I'll let all you know that I didn't even think
Oh yeah,
of
there are some
to represent
there are some problematic
this
and
conversation in
and
that way.
recent examples of some problematic representations. And I think, any honest person can tell the difference between an authentic representation and something that is making fun of or making lesser than. But if you just also want to watch a really recent, really fun kind of celebration of female empowerment and literal body swapping, check out Christopher Landon's Freaky with Catherine Newton and Vince Vaughn.
Oh, that is such a great film.
It's a really good movie. It's literally about a man trapped in a woman's body and acting in a way that no one expects and scares people. It's really good. It's violent. It's funny. Catherine Newton kicks the shit out of this role. She is so good in it. And honestly, I'm not always a big Vince Vaughn fan, but he's great in this movie.
Yeah. He's best when he's not
Vince Vaughn.
Yeah.
He plays a very un-Vince Vaughn-like character in this movie, and I think that's to his credit. Well, that about does it. Happy Pride Month, everybody. I want to say personally, one thing I really, really enjoy is where we live does celebrate Pride all month, and local stores really get into it, and the town is so colorful and beautiful. Everyone has like a really nice display. It just, I don't know, walking around, it definitely has a certain vibe that is one of joy and one of celebration, and I can get behind that. I like that.
And I just want to say that, if you really are interested in being an ally to the queer community, learn their stories, and not just genre specific stories, but all kinds of stories, and really come from a perspective of understanding.
And why not start with horror?
We can all be included.
Yeah. And some of the best stories are the scary ones, because they always are.
So happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everybody.
Enjoy. Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Hispanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're staying.